everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Michel. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. Thank you for being a part of our virtual community. Tattered Cover is known for being a communal space in the Denver metro area. And right now we're not able to be together in that physical space, smell the books, touch the books. But we're so grateful that you're here in this virtual space with us. We wouldn't be here for the past year or the past 50 years without it. Because for some of you, that you may not know, Tattered Cover is turning 50 years old in 2021, which is an amazing feat for a bookstore. And in large part, that is thanks to you, our community, over the last 50 years. For those of you who may be joining us outside of the Denver metro area, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore that has 4 locations, soon to be 5 actually. We have our children's location opening up in the Stanley Marketplace over the summer. And right now, one of our locations is mid-move, which is very exciting. We're moving to a brand new building in McGregor Square on 20th and Wine Coop. So that store is currently not open, but our other 3 are. And you can come visit us as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose. And you can come shop and browse for about 90 minutes or so. But if you're like me and want to shop in your pajamas, or if you're not actually able to come to the location, that's okay. We've got you and all your bookish needs covered at tatteredcover.com. Also on tatteredcover.com is our events. Oh my gosh, there are so many amazing events that we have up and coming. Even one just later tonight with Nigella Lawson and Yodam Ottolenghi, which is for any of you cookbook fans out there, mystery authors. We have John Grisham next week. You just need to check it out. There's something for everyone on there. And tonight, I'm very excited about the authors and artists and builders alike that we have. This is a very unique presentation that I'm very excited for here. We're celebrating the book Cool is Everywhere, which Denver makes an amazing appearance. And it's so beautiful, and I'm so glad that today we're going to get some visuals. And it's written by Michel Arnaud, and he is here tonight with Donald Albrecht and Michael Moore to discuss Cool is Everywhere. So it's my pleasure to welcome all Michel, Donald, and Michael. And so we're going to have them join me here. Hello, everybody.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. Oh, thank you so much for all joining us from all over the place. We're so excited to have you with us tonight. Michel, I believe that you're going to start us off with an amazing presentation.
Well, I just first wanted to say good afternoon to everybody, and I wanted to thank the Tattered Cover Bookstore for hosting this conversation. And I want to extend a big welcome to everybody who is joining us now. And I would like to add a special thank you to Donald and Michael, who are for their collaboration. I'm sorry. Donald Albrecht was involved from the beginning of this book in 2016, and he gave us advice, leads, and introduction to project, and it was very helpful. And he did a masterly introduction to the book, which is fantastic. And I want to thank you, Michael, who, when I visited Denver, was a guide. It was inspirational. He told me that in and out of the city, and he introduced me to some of his projects, which were just wonderful. So having said that, I think that I should explain that Cool is Everywhere find its root in my personal interest in post-industrial city in America. And I am fascinated by the way the city reinvent themselves and how and why. And of course, I love to discover abandoned buildings, to photograph them and see what happened to them and how they find a new life, a new purpose, and very often keeping some of their identity intact. And without further ado, I would like to say that the book I'm going to share my screen to show the presentation that we've put together. And okay, and this is the cover of the book. And the book covers 14 cities, medium-sized cities, and we wanted the cities to be under 1 million inhabitants, of the population of under 1 million. And Nashville just made it. It was very close to 1 million, but it was under, and so we included it because it's an extremely interesting project there. The book covers 3 trends, highlights 3 trends. And Donald?
Yes, thank you. It was a great pleasure to work with Michel, and I also interviewed Mike for my introduction to the book. The cities that the book discusses are the products of enormous and significant demographic shifts that have occurred in the United States over the last maybe 15, 20 years. In the first half of the last decade, people more and more concentrated in big cities, but more recently they have left so-called super cities like New York and San Francisco, and this has been accelerated during the pandemic actually, in favor of smaller ones like those in the book, including Denver. A lot of different factors have driven this demographic shift that has produced the rise and the rebirth of many mid-sized cities like the 14 in the book. The big one is lower housing costs. Smaller cities have lower housing costs than larger cities. They also have diversified economies. They have major universities, which brings young people into themselves. They now provide a high quality cuisine and a culture that was once available only in big cities. Now, the book, as Michel mentioned, has 3 sections. The first we're going to talk about is historic architecture. But before we do, I want to give the other ones. Many of these cities are industrial, and they have reclaimed old industrial sites and converted these industrial sites into parks. Another theme is maker culture, which I made that term up. Maker culture is, I use it because artisans and artists were the pioneers who moved in to revive these cities. And a major characteristic of these cities is the artisanal culture that they have, the baristas, the small craft shops that give them their dynamic urban character. The third of the 3 is historic architecture, the revival of these great buildings, which we're looking at here, Union Station in Denver, which Mike is going to briefly talk about as our native Denverite.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Union Station, it sat fairly abandoned for a few decades back, but it was built in the late 1800s, 1881, burned down to its stone foundation in 1895. What you see here was rebuilt. It was primarily a train hub. Denver at the turn of the century was industrialized to process minerals. This building now, as you're seeing, is also a train hub, but it's a bus hub, and it's our commuter light rail, and it is now really the transportation hub of Denver Metro in the lower downtown area. So all these transportation means are there, but then what's housed in the original train station are restaurants and markets and flower shops and bookstores, and really a wonderful space. I frequented this building a lot to catch the bus back to Boulder for years, getting my master's degree of architecture. And there was nothing inside that building except for a vending machine. And the transformation has really been quite incredible.
I'm sorry that I switched the pictures too early. Thank you, Michael.
No problem.
Okay, those 2 pictures from Greenville, South Carolina. Greenville is a former textile mill town, which converted itself in an automobile center where BMW and Michelin have their head office. On the left, this is the Brandon Cotton Mill. It's a vast building, which in 1901, when it opened, had 10,000 spindles and 400 looms. After multiple reconversion, this mill has been transformed into luxury rental loft. Please note that they kept like the original smokestack, next to that swimming pool, which is obviously new. And there is a water tower somewhere, which is not in that picture, unfortunately, but they kept it intact so it keep, the flavor of what the building, apart from the architecture, obviously, was. I mean, the history in a way. On the right side, in downtown Greenville, which nowadays is a beautiful, welcoming downtown with a lot of green and space. You have this amazing building, which used to be the Greenville County Courthouse and which is now a trendy bookstore. And now we are coming to Nashville. And this is the picture, an exterior picture of the Frist Art Museum, which is a repurposing of the main Nashville post office in the 30s. Actually, the building was built. Sorry. During the Great Depression, and the building for many years was the main central post office, and the Frist family obviously purchased the building and repurposed it into a museum, which is absolutely beautiful. They kept the floor plan, the detailing, and the space. I mean, you can see this is the main floor when you come into the museum, and this is exactly what you see. And
if I can just interrupt for a second. One of the really fascinating parts about the adaptive reuse of this project is you would not think a post office would be suitable for an art museum, but actually it is, because the big processing center of the post office had no windows. And for galleries which need to be light sensitive for the art, having no windows is actually an advantage. So the transformation from one function to another was actually ideal because of this large, unlit, no daylighting central space.
And this is a second project, which is actually, one of my favorite repurposing of a building in Nashville too. It's called the Old Glory, and it used to be a dry cleaner, obviously an industrial dry cleaner. And they've made it out. They made a restaurant and a bar restaurant with practically not touching the inside of this huge space. And when you come in you come in from that staircase on the left, you see this astonishingly enormous boiler, which is, I think, about 60 feet tall. Nobody's exactly, I mean, I don't know exactly, but it's absolutely breathtaking. And you can see in the corner of the second shot, on the right shot, the bar, the beginning of the bar, which extend to the right, and then the table are on facing that boiler. Love that repurposing. This now we're moving to Portland, which. This is the EcoTrust building, the John Woollum Natural Capital Center. It's a non-profit environmental organization. They took over a warehouse which was 70,000 square feet and refurbished it, make it eco-friendly, and created offices for themselves. And they do rent, because of the size itself, to other companies as long as they are eco-friendly, motivated, and have the same sensitivity than the Eco Trust. And now we're moving to North Adam, and I think Don or the special.
Art and culture are oftentimes great generators of urban transformation in the last 20, 30 years. And North Adams, Massachusetts is a great example of that. At the end of the last century, the art history staff of nearby Williams College Museum of Art were noticing a trend in art, and that was large environmental pieces of art that couldn't fit into the traditional gallery. And that required a new kind of space that was gigantic in scale. And they discovered an abandoned electric plant in North Adams, which is near Williams College. And they converted it into what's called Mass MoCA. It's an abandoned electric plant. It has vast exhibition spaces. And it was a generator of tourism in this abandoned, smaller industrial town. Restaurants and hotels followed for people to eat and stay in when they visited Mass MoCA. And more recently, there's a new complex. Let's go to the next slide. Called, this is still North, this is still Mass MoCA.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Wow. Yes,
This is Greylock's work, which is under construction now. It's developed by a husband and wife architecture team in New York. It's a complex of an old textile mill. Again, the theme of industrial production that moves out of an area is then supplanted by new, oftentimes, art, culture, and tourism. So this was an old textile mill and aluminum processing plant. And it's on its way to becoming a 240,000 square foot campus that's going to include event spaces, workshops. It may include a hotel. There's community centers. They're making a small town out of this once large textile facility.
Reclaimed landscape, Michael. This is Denver.
You're muted.
I'm sorry.
He's muted. Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yep, here's a shot from Denver. Because at the turn of the century, the industry was primarily mineral processing. Minerals are very heavy. So train lines were developed throughout our city, connecting us to Kansas and Cheyenne, Wyoming. And it really was the primary mode of moving the industry. Our city has really embraced reclaiming these rivers and reclaiming something like this, which was a bridge built for train. Now it is for pedestrians and recreation.
This is another view from Denver. From actually,
really, our river was, for the most part, abandoned for a good part of the last century. Industry built along it because they needed water to primarily cool things. But the negative result of that was that water would find its way back to the river, and often it was toxic water. So it's really been the last 30 years that folks have stepped up, and the city has stepped up, and certain individuals have stepped up to clean up our South Plat River and the creeks that lead to it. The river is now clean, and we are now starting to, really the last 20 years, reclaim all those industrial buildings that hug the river.
Okay, and just a note from the photographer, actually this point of view was taken about 300 yards from the REI huge sports store. And and I did find interesting all the green and the building in the background and everything. And this is a shot in Pittsburgh. People will notice that I'm missing an H for Pittsburgh. It's my fault. I just noted this too late to be able to correct it. Anyway, this is a shot the downtown park of Pittsburgh. In the background, you have this yellow steel bridge, which is painted in gold color, and gold Aztec color, which is the color of the Steelers football team. And what I particularly like about it is that it gives a sense of how the city is sort of designed and evolved, and you have the little village. It's about like an arc around the downtown area where you have little areas, little villages, I would say, which are there. And I think this illustrates this very well. I mean, Pittsburgh used to be a big steel town, of course, and now it's a huge cultural center that was prompted by the Mellon Art Museum, which started in around the 19th century, and more recently by the university, the Carnegie and Mellon University there. Pittsburgh now hosts new tech industry. They are home, I mean, they have office, Google has offices, Microsoft, and Uber as well. This is Buffalo, New York. And this is a view of this compound called Riverwork. I mean, it's a huge complex which integrate new restaurant, brewery, music venues, sports, sport possibility like kayaking, rock climbing. It even has a zip line, and it kept the old silos of the mills and integrated into this new kind of entertainment and park. And the contrast between the new and the old is very striking. And there you have a view of the elevator silos. It's very famous, I believe, and it's on the river, and it was built in 1928. And at this point, I don't think much, I mean, there is some restoration happening, but nothing great is happening. It might be included in the Riverwork, but it's a thing in progress. Now we're coming to Birmingham, and I think Birmingham is one of those cities who've integrated a green attitude, a more, park. They've created a park in the center of town. It's called the railroad. It's called the Railroad Park, which opened in 2010, and it has park. It has walking paths, shelters, lake, and it's connected through the cities by the rotary trails that you see on the right, which use old, road and converted into a walking passage with green. And I think it's extremely successful development. I don't know what you think, Donald, but personally. Now we are coming to Richmond. Richmond, of course, was an industrial town, and of course, it was one of the center of the tobacco industry. And the River James that we see there is the center of development of historically. When there was the tobacco and mining industry and banking industries, that was everything was happening through the river. And nowadays, its new iteration, so to speak, is to have created beaches on the river, walking paths for people and industrial structures. And on the side of the river, you have a lot of loft and apartment building, which all line along the river, so that the entire river is being redeveloped and revitalized.
Yes, and I mentioned earlier, that what you might call maker culture has also been a generator of the revival of these cities. Not only have makers like artists and artisans been the pioneers moving in to these neighborhoods and reviving them, but even today, makers also include purveyors of artisanal coffees and beers, developers of craft shops. We're going to talk in a little while about the murals in Denver. And these coffee shops and breweries and small places are actually quite important. Sociologists talk about social infrastructure. And we think about important gathering spaces like churches, schools, libraries, but these smaller commercial spaces are actually quite significant in the creation of a neighborhood cohesion and neighborhood formation. They're equally significant. Could I have the next image?
Wait a minute, one note on this. The art is by Denver local Chris Huth. And I know, Michelle, you did such a good job of calling out the other artists. I wanted to make a call out to Chris.
Okay, thank you.
Which is very rare, Michelle. So good job. No one ever credits the street artists. So well done.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate this. I don't know if you can hear me, but okay.
Oakland is a good example of what we call maker culture. This is what's called Temescal Alleys. It's two pedestrian ways that have been combined. It's almost all locally owned artisan shops and cafes and restaurants. And it was developed, I find oftentimes the people who develop these areas are from kind of strange mixed backgrounds. This was a husband and wife team. She's an artist and developer, and he's a professor of architecture in California. So they combined their talents to create this very distinctive, unique place.
Michael?
Sure, yeah.
We're in Denver.
Yeah, we're back in Denver. We're, if you could see behind you, would be the South Plat River. And, here's a project that actually was a locomotive repair station back in the day. So it had to be very tall and very big. And the Zeppelin father-son team of Mickey and Kyle Zeppelin repurposed this project into a food hall and really community gathering space. Specifically, we did some work here. There's lots of folks who did work here, but we were part of a small art collective that was one of the spaces called Super Ordinary by Tron and Josh Wills back in the day. I think this is a really good example of, these old buildings are an ally to us designers and sort of aestheticians because they're made of real materials. They, to make a building like this today would not be financially feasible. And so it's this level of authenticity that these buildings have. And with good architecture and good developers, that's kept intact. So we insulate the buildings and daylight them and modernize them in ways where we don't cover up that original structure or datum of what was originally built. And so you can feel the old, but you're immersed in the new. There's actually a great hotel next to this now for anyone visiting Denver. That's a good spot to land. This is a project that my firm, Trace Birds, both designed and built. It is a distillery by a very successful developer, Paul Tombarello, and a seasoned distiller, Rob Masters. And, I think it's a good one that you show. I guess all the rest of the slides from Denver that you're about to show are also Trace Birds projects, but this one specifically, it's a distillery, but it's also a tasting room, and we wanted to make the distilling the queen of the space. So maybe the next slide, where no matter where you are in the space or even outside, the process of making the spirits is always the visual focal point and the queen of the space. It really claims the space. My firm, we design, build most all of our projects. We're an artist and architect led design build firm, which is almost unheard of. And literally my employees that worked with me to draw this building and design it and figure it out also were the ones to build it, which again goes back to Donald, this sort of maker culture of, for me, it's always, can we do better than anyone did before by sort of taking control of it and being totally accountable for the project. And the family Jones, we designed, how we were going to manipulate the building, how all the systems worked. We designed the furniture, the lighting, all the way through all the details. And with this project and lots of our projects, we not only reclaim the building, but the materials we bring in are also from the region and materials that used to be a part of other projects. We're like professional scavengers that are artists that then make as good a thing as we can because we want to make the world better.
So this is
Denver Central Market, also, only a few blocks away from the river. This project by Ken Wolf, they took this building that, before it was this food hall, was filled with cars and it was a repair shop. And made it into, I think there's about 15 vendors in there. It's one of my favorite places to get lunch. This neighborhood was a bit of a food desert 10 years ago. And, there's something for everyone here, which has made it very popular. This is a building that we designed and built, reclaimed. These are all reclamation. It's about 20,000 square feet. It had no windows. It was purely storage. And where we really tactically opened the building up to the sun, who is my number one ally, is the sun. And this hosts now, I think, 6 different restaurants, bar, and boutique sort of clothes. It's on Larimer Street, which it has become really a night spot for our city and particularly our youth. A big part of this neighborhood is the street art that has been happening in the alleys for probably 40 years, 30 years, and really in the last 15 has really claimed itself as our sort of free public art zone that's always changing. You can walk this neighborhood every quarter of the year and you're going to see something different. This is a project that we designed and built also called Steam on the Plat. It is literally right on the Platte River. It was a former rag baling facility. Very romantic, sexy start to a building. Literally all the clothes that can't be sold at Goodwill or given away end up here. And they would sanitize the rags and ship them off around the world so they could be disposable rags. We turned it into a Class A office building that, folks like Lyft and some architecture firms and, about 20 different companies are housed out of. I will say, there's a rag baler right there that we incorporated into the new stairs. So often our work is about kind of not messing up the building. This was a heavy timber building that was only used for warehousing for its whole life. It was rag baling and warehousing. And we needed to insulate it and heat it and cool it and artificially light it and make it secure and all these things. In my opinion, our number one job is just not mess up what's already there. It's so darn beautiful. Clean it up, figure out ways to insulate it where you can't tell you're doing it, and really just let it be. And that is an authenticity that I know that myself and a lot of our sort of American youth appreciate, especially ones that are staring at a computer all day and in the sort of virtual world, to be able to be in places that are very real, very authentic. What you see is what you get. That's what people want. They want to work there, they want to recreate there, and they want to live there.
Actually, if I could just interrupt for a second. The enthusiasm that you're hearing in Mike's voice is not something that was true 60, 70 years ago. At the end of the Second World War, the new was given great prominence, and there was a preservation movement that was really taking steam in the 50s and 60s. The destruction of Pennsylvania Station in New York City prompted the creation of the New York City Landmarks Commission. So it took time for people to begin to appreciate these buildings. It's not been something that has been part of the American character, certainly not after the Second World War. And then in the 1970s, the federal government allowed tax credits to private developers to restore and reuse old buildings. So there was a social enthusiasm for the older building rising, but the federal government stepped in and provided an economic incentive to restore these buildings.
I want to add at this point, I see, okay, all right. I wanted to add at this point that in Nashville, when I first visited Nashville in the early 90s, okay, you can't see me. Okay, Donald, you're still on. I don't know.
Michel, you're a focus right now, so you're good. Continue talking.
No, I was going to just add to what Donald was saying, is that in Nashville that I visited actually in late 80s, early 90s, the town had, I mean, everything, all the old building had been destroyed on the downtown in some areas, and very few old building was left. And it's only, as Donald mentioned, very recently, actually, especially in Nashville, that a repurposing of what was left of the old building has taken place, with, of course, a lot of new building, which some of them are interesting. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
I think, Donald, you mentioned the 1970s. Well, I was born in 1970. And I think part of it is that a lot of us born Gen Xers and whatever happens after us, we grew up in drywall boxes. We never saw the structure of where we lived or the buildings that our parents officed in or our schools. They were drywall boxes. And it was sort of contemporary balloon framing. So I think, you always want what you didn't have, right? So, I think that's part of it. And for me personally, this was a very conscious decision when I started my firm that I was going to focus on reclaiming buildings really as an environmental act. In the United States, our buildings consume 50% of our non-renewable energy right now today. So half of our energy usage as a society, as humans, is operating and making buildings. And so my background in environmental biology and environmental sciences and fine arts, I had the confidence to say, you know what, I'm going to focus on reclaiming buildings because it lowers the embodied energy by at least 2/3 compared to building a new building, right? The building you're looking at here, you could have ripped it down and made a new building. That building would require about 3 times the amount of energy to create that building as opposed to reclaiming a building. So it was very much an environmental act. But then there was all these great side benefits, like you have these authentic materials. You are often in the city centers because they're old buildings and cities are built around these buildings. These old buildings, masonry and heavy timber, it's actually easier to manipulate those buildings structurally than it is new buildings. Because new buildings are so efficient with how they're designed, it's hard to open up big window bays or open up roofs or open floors to one another. So yeah, that's about it. Back to this slide, another Michael Ortiz and Detour, Tom's work, where, really this whole neighborhood where I think, Tracebirds has now completed about 93 projects in the last 21 years. I think 40 of them are within 3 miles of sort of this River North Art District, 5 Points coal neighborhood. Street artists have been here for a long time. Shout out to Guerrilla Garden and shout out to all the folks that were heavy in the alleys. And it's brought up a whole new generation of artists that are both fine artists and street artists, who we have an event or had an event that's evolving, where in September we'd have up to 50 to 100 artists internationally come to this part of town, kind of have at it. The key to that, I will say, is that the landowners and the building owners and the developers in the area all shook their head to, what? We believe that street art will actually make this neighborhood better and isn't a nuisance or isn't something that's going to bring crime. It's going to actually do the opposite. And it worked. So, congratulations to those that took risks because it's working.
And so I think we complete the presentation. I don't know if I'm on now. I can't see. And actually, there's an interesting structure on the back cover of the book, which is a repurposing of industrial shelves, which have been put recreating this kind of structure, which make the building, which is pretty standard, stand out and be quite exciting. I have no idea if you hear me. I don't see if my little box is lit. Anyway, so that's the end of the presentation.
Wonderful. We were so enamored with that. That was beautiful. And I think you can't talk about your subject without having pictures. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's such a visual book and such a visual subject. So thank you for sharing that with us. We have a couple more minutes available in our program for any questions that any audience members may have. There's a chat next to the screen you're watching us on right now where you can type in any of your questions. And I would love to start with this first one of Michel and Michael. How did you two get in touch to talk about the Denver portion of the book? How did you two meet originally?
Good question. Good question. I wonder if Donald got me in touch with Michael.
I think it.
I can't quite remember because it was actually the first thing I did when I arrived in Denver was to call Michael. And I drove down with my rental car to his offices, and it was really great and so helpful and interested in the project.
No, I think I put you in touch with people in Buffalo.
You did. I
And-
thought maybe Michael, but you see, I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I
gave you the credit because you know so many people in Denver.
Yes, my partner who is watching this lives in Denver, and I've met many of his friends over the years and have friends from before we met. So I'm an honorary Denverite.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll take you. You're more than welcome. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And so there's so much information and so much history on these towns. Michel, where did you even start with your research?
Well, the thing is that in 2013, I started a project in Detroit. And it was the beginning of the rebirth of Detroit, if you want. And I did a book on that, and I spent 3 years going in and out of Detroit, doing the story of the rejuvenation of the city. The book was actually published by Abrams 2017. And through this process, I visited a lot of cities because I would drive a lot with my family going to Detroit. And we would stop in Pittsburgh and we would stop in various other towns, and we would see change happening. And Pittsburgh was a particular example. And I felt when I completed Detroit that there was a bigger story there. And I wanted a huge story. And of course, with publishers, we don't necessarily do huge stories, but they did give me a chance to do a story, which I feel is a good illustration of what is happening in America from the West Coast to the East Coast and to the South. And, I've discovered cities like Birmingham, Alabama, that, was amazing. I mean, practically every visit was a discovery and an exciting adventure.
That's wonderful to hear. And you can see it in the work as well. And so there was a specific question about photography and what the process of taking pictures of the buildings in the various cities was like. What was that process like? Was it different in each city?
No, there's a basically, use a good tripod, put a camera on the tripod, look at the image, try to frame the image like, you would frame a painting or a picture or portrait, and see what resonates to you into that space, and then take the shot. I mean,
I think
take a reading, look at things. I mean, there's a lot of bits and pieces, but I mean, basically, the thing is that you have to have an emotional connection to the space, so that I think you can give it a fair expression. And so,
I mean, I would say that, Michel, when you interviewed me, you hadn't been to these sites yet. And so I remember you really asking some very good questions and really listening. And you did your turnaround time was very quick. I remember you're only here for a few days, and I've worked with lots of photographers, and usually, a photographer of your caliber, they'll take days just to shoot one project. They'll study it for a full day. And you were pretty darn efficient. But I think it's because of, through dialogue, I think you maybe understood your intentions were to understand the spirit of the project, and that your images are sort of a result of that. And back to the first question about how did we get introduced, I just remember it was Darren Alfred from the Denver Art Museum,
Yes.
Right.
who
Okay.
is the director of architecture, textile, fashion.
That's right. Okay.
I don't know how you got, that was smart to talk to someone like him to see kind of what's going on. Which kind of brings up the subject matter of, I've sort of used your book as a bit of like a city tour guide, because I want to go to those places. I want to see those projects because of just for education reasons for myself and my profession. But also those areas tend to be where the cool shit's going on. Like
Right.
where a startup is happening, or like the best new little restaurant, or someone in fashion doing something interesting or provocative, or in Oakland, what you showed in Denver and most of those cities, these places, that tends to be what happens. So your book to me is kind of like a tour guide.
I have to say, that you only see a few pictures of what was taken. Obviously, we had to do a very hard edit.
Yes.
We tried to put all those cities together in the book, which is about 272 pages, I think. And it deserved 400 pages if you had the luxury. But you don't, and you have a commercial restraint. And the other thing is that I've been doing the job of taking pictures, architectural pictures, exterior and interior, for many years. I used to work for House and Garden, Architectural Digest, and I've done quite a few books as illustrator before I do my own. And I even did a huge book on the most expensive apartment in New York City called Life at the Top. And that, again, was an amazing project. But just to say that, when you see the picture, when you feel the ambiance, and when you see the light being the key to the shot, apart from framing it. But if you don't have the light, it's a big, there's not much.
Yeah, I also have to say, what I found interesting was Michel and I and his wife got involved. I got involved early on, and I was watching the photography, and I was watching what he was photographing. So that was the ground from which I built up. And then I did enough research to provide a frame, looking for broader themes. But the core was watching his itinerary and watching, you mentioned a kind of a tour guide. I was taking a tour across the country by watching what he was photographing, was researching them, and then trying to draw larger themes. So it was a very organic process that created the book.
No, that's wonderful to hear. And that's amazing that you got that perspective on it. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions here. And one of which is, what do you all see as the future of cities post-pandemic in relation to adaptive reuse?
Well,
Let's not get deeper into things.
Personally, I think that the movement of working at home, having a home office, is going to keep going. It might not go bigger, but it will slowly become, it's changing the culture of people and works in some ways. And the other thing is that there is for the young people who move to small cities or smaller cities for reason of affordability of real estate, there is a sort of emotional feeling to go into an older building and try to restore it, or to do something with it, do a coffee shop, or and then it gives them a sort of, not really a root, but it gives them an emotional handle for their changing of environment.
I live in New York City, and the adaptive reuse of office buildings, which is what Manhattan Island is largely made of, is going to be the most challenging thing for the revival of New York City, because people will not be going back to these offices 5 days a week from 9 to 5:30. So how to change the paradigm of what those office buildings were set up for and not tear them down, but reuse them and adapt them to new purposes, but also to a new kind of work culture is going to be a huge economic and architectural challenge in New York City. And I think it'll be true of all cities that have business centers and business cores.
You know, Donald, I think there is a book in it.
And
Yeah, especially a before and after.
before and after book.
Oh, that would be great.
Maybe we can figure out how to house our homeless amongst all these ideas.
There's got to be something.
Something.
Amen to that.
I would say, for Denver, just because we have so much sun, we can be outside 9 months, to some extent, 12 months a year, not every day, but 8 or 9 months almost every day. So I think just the continuation of outdoor space, that's public space where you can live, work, recreate, drink, eat, just keep on programming these outdoor space and really continuing to have our things like our South Platte River and sort of let nature start dominating again. I think that's what everyone wants, and we can do it because we've started it and we've got examples of it. And, I think, Michel, your book starts to show how this can really work. Not every site deserves to be, where you tear down a building and you make a 12-story building on top of it. There's value in authenticity and lower scale and sort of humbleness too.
And also what I think is very interesting for many of these projects, a lot of people believe preservation is something that people do because the government of a city has designated a building as being needed to be preserved. But there's actually a lot of accidental preservation going on that isn't restricted by codes or by city laws. It's just the building stock is so adaptable and so good and so authentic that developers are moving in and reusing it. It's not always mandated by preservation laws.
Yeah, none of the projects you saw of Trace Birds were mandated. None of those are historic buildings.
Right.
It's because it made the most sense economically, feasibility wise. It made a lot of sense.
So we're looking at more livable city, basically.
I love that though, as a way to move forward after something like this. The last question that we like to ask here at Tattered Cover is interpret it as you will, but it always brings up such interesting answers. But what did this book teach you? And I'd love it if we could do Donald, Michael, and then Michel, and we can close out our evening.
Well, it taught me as a New York City snob that there are great cities all over the country.
Nice.
I like that. I appreciate that.
For me and my incredible staff and our strong team, it was that we're not alone. That there's people thinking this way and putting the sweat equity and giving the blood, and it's not easy to do. It's not an easy pursuit. Building anything is not an easy pursuit, particularly reclaiming. You got to have the stomach for it, and just that we're not alone. That it's happening. It's burling up, and we're all sort of feeding off of one another. And really, again, with the intention of making good and making the world a better place.
And Michel?
Well, I mean, because I did the pictures and I mean, it just taught me that, a lot of hope and aspiration can be fulfilled. And as for myself, I now moved out of New York City before the pandemic, and we live in an old factory It used to be a little factory, and it was a small factory. Of course, we were making little furniture. And so I leave the reality of the book in a way.
You walk the talk. We love it. Thank you.
Well, that's it.
And thank you to the three of you for spending your evening with us. Thank you, Michel, for this wonderful book, and Donald and Michael for your contributions to it as well. You can get your copies of Cool is Everything at tatteredcover.com or at any one of our open locations right now. I do want to give the three of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we close tonight. Since I had Donald go first, Michael, I'd love it if you could start. We'll do Donald and end with our photographer, artist, author of the hour, Michel. So Michael, if you could kick us off.
Yeah, I'm Michael Moore. I'm the founder and design principal of Trace Birds, like a Mexican 3 trace. And we are a full service design build firm based in Denver, but we've worked all around the world and sort of focus on adaptive reuse.
And my name is Donald Albrecht. I'm an independent curator and an author. And my website is djalbrecht.com.
And my name is Michel, Michel Arnaud, Arnaud. And my website is www.michelarnaud.com. You can review what I do and what I did. And I'm always looking for new exciting projects. So send an email.
Love it. And I'm Michaeli with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Gentlemen, if you'll stick around just while I close this out here, I want to thank you all again for joining us tonight. For some of you out there, it's dinner time. Maybe think about supporting a local independent business, mom and pop restaurant. We appreciate your support now throughout the pandemic this past year and years previously. We would not be here without you. This has been Cool is Everything with Michel Arnaud, Michael Moore, and Donald Albrecht. And we thank you all again for joining us. Stay safe, everybody. Happy reading. Good night.